was asked to do that, and being my age and all that stuff, it totally left me. And you're lucky I was able to run down here to get us started. Let us pray. Father, we do thank you for all the things you've done for us and all the things that you do, the blessings that you give us, Lord. And sometimes we really don't appreciate the things that you give us because we sometimes fail to realize that what we have is a blessing from you. We thank you for that, Lord. We ask you please to go with us as we live each day and help us to be good examples for those people that see us and those people that are aware that watch us and see what things we do. And please give us wisdom to deal with all the circumstances that we come across. Father, again, we thank you for the things you do for us. We ask you please forgive us of our sins and please guide us each day as we live. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Our next song this evening will be number 220, He Lives, first and last verse, because I forgot to mention that the first time. That's my bad. I serve a risen Savior, He's in the world today. I know that He is living, whatever men may say. I see His hand of mercy, I hear His voice of cheer. And just the time I need Him, He's always near. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, Christ's nation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart. Rejoice, rejoice, O Christian, lift up your voice and sing eternal hallelujahs to Jesus Christ the King, the hope of all who seek Him, the help of all who find. None other is so loving, so good and kind. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
Good evening. Welcome to our Bible class hour on the Wednesday, whatever the date is, in 2025. What is April 23rd? Thank you, Kathy Joe, for putting that on the sheet. A few announcements before we are dismissed to go to classes this evening. Kelly Wilson, Gwen and Willard's daughter-in-law, had successful surgery to remove kidney stones on Monday. She is home and doing well. Nina and Jeanette need our prayers. They are still settling in, and Jeanette fell, but she would not go see a doctor. And in addition to that, they have not found a church home yet. Howard Baldwin, that's Rodney's brother, had a liver biopsy. I believe that was yesterday, and they are awaiting results. And because of that liver biopsy, and he was having some difficulties, had to go to the emergency room, and because of that, the chemo treatment for his leukemia has been put on hold. Also, we need to pray for his wife, Nancy, who is in a memory care facility. Did Charlie or Wanda make it here tonight? How's Scott?
He's not going to the ER yet.
Okay, so Wanda and Charlie's son Scott, who's been having respiratory problems, had a what do we call it?
He's having
A relapse today.
He's in oxygen, but he's back on oxygen.
Okay. but has not had to go to the hospital as of yet. Extravaganza is this Saturday. Hot dogs and hamburgers will be provided. Please bring sides, desserts, and drinks. There will be an egg hunt for the kids, games to play, and candy to eat. May the 2nd and 3rd, that's a Friday and a Saturday, is a yard sale at Pam Moon's. The dates that were on the email that went out yesterday were incorrect. So setup for the yard sale will begin Thursday evening, May the 1st. If you have items you want to sell, bring them over. It will be up to you to set them up and to sell them and to clean up afterwards. It's a very good location. If you don't know where Pam lives, it's right down on this main road here, and it's a great location. Usually has a lot of traffic. If you have any questions, you can talk to Pam. I saw her here a while ago. There she is. Saturday from 2 to 4 on May the 3rd, there will be a baby shower for Serenity Rain, Stephanie and Jermaine's new little one, and that will be in the fellowship room. On Sunday, May the 4th, after the evening service, actually, the evening service on May the 4th, first Sunday in May, will be conducted in the fellowship room. And I will do a short devotional, and then after the service is concluded, the Lads to Leaders awards will be displayed, and they will give their puppet show performance. All of that will take place in the fellowship room. We need volunteers to train on the AV system upstairs there and monitor it during Bible classes and service. If you're interested, please see Brent Barnhill or Randy Misseldine. Camp Wiregrass is taking applications. If information is on the flyer in the foyer on the bulletin board. And coming soon, Panama shoeboxes for Operation Christmas Joy will be starting, and we will announce when they are ready to be picked up. You are dismissed to go to your classes.
Can you reposition the camera? We're streaming and everything, but can you just fix the camera? Thanks. Don't lock me out. Don't lock me out. I'm going in there, yeah. We got to come way up tonight. All righty, good evening. All right, we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 5. That's where we'll begin tonight, verses 1 through 23, and then we'll move to chapter 6, verses 20 through 35, hopefully, if we get that far, which I think we should. Depending on how y'all answer here at the beginning, because I'll be honest with you, I'm about to broach a very unpopular subject. This is almost as bad as politics. Okay? So y'all ready? Do what? No, not your weight. No. Who's your least favorite celebrity? I know, right? The list is too long. The ones that's left the country. No, those are my favorite ones because they're gone. Do what? I thought I heard somebody. Nobody's got a least. Nobody wants to say it, right? Y'all have all got a least favorite celebrity. Y'all just don't want to say it. Too many. Do what? Taylor Swift. Okay, there's one. Madonna. Adam Sandler. She doesn't like Adam Sandler. The Kardashians. That's who I was going to say. Do what? Okay, you're too busy to deal with all that. Yeah, I like that, Grace. Okay, but we're going to talk about celebrities for a little bit, just for a moment here. You'll see where we're going with this. Okay, but have you ever noticed how many celebrity marriages fail? Okay? Grace is like, no, I don't pay attention to that. Okay, good for you, Grace. Okay, there you go, working on your own. Okay. But for those of you that have paid attention, which one surprised you the most? Okay, the ones that succeeded. Okay. Because you can't think of any. There's a few. I can't think of any right now, but I know there's a few. The one that always has stood out in my mind, and this was when I was younger, was Charles and Diana. You know, I count them as celebrities because over here they're pretty much celebrities. Okay, and I remember that was that fairy tale wedding, and everybody thought, oh, this is, and then several years later they're divorced. So that was one for me. Any others? Okay, Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise.
Okay.
Is he divorced?
Oh yeah, a couple times. Yeah.
I'm with Grace. I don't know nothing about it.
All righty. Well, according to statistics, the most common cause, and I misspelled common, I'm sorry, the most common cause of celebrity divorce is infidelity. Anybody surprised by that? Okay. What effect, if any, do you think that has on their popularity or their career when they get divorced, especially because of infidelity? So-and-so cheated on so-and-so, they got divorced, Do you think that affects their popularity? Not at all. Okay, they're in the tabloids for a while, so sometimes they become more popular, because of that. Okay? Let's say, what about 50 years ago? Do you think it would have affected their popularity or their career more or less, or even, say, 75 years ago? Okay. Roy?
I was just thinking 50 or 60 years ago. They were expected to do that. That was something that was normal in their fairyland life. I don't keep up with them that much anymore, but a lot of them was divorcing back then, 4, 5, 6, 7 times.
Right.
And I don't think it affected them at all.
Yeah.
Because they lived in Never Land anyway.
In fact, there are probably some who, if you stop and think about it, at least today, that's what they're more known for. Think about Elizabeth Taylor. When I think of Elizabeth Taylor, I think, oh, she's been divorced a bunch of times. She had a bunch of husbands. I couldn't name you one movie Elizabeth Taylor's been in. I know she did some perfume commercials. That's about all I know about her. Okay? But what stands out in my mind is how many husbands she had. And the reverse is true for some male celebrities, the number of wives that they have had. Henry VIII. We're talking about way back when.
You go back far enough, at least if you can believe what you read, and even I've seen I remember seeing some movies. You go back far enough, and I don't know, it might have been the 30s, 20s and 30s or 40s, and it did affect them. Divorce did in Hollywood. Their manager, or their, what do you call it, the people that were in charge of
agent
would tell them, you gotta, you can run around on her, but you gotta, in public, you gotta act like you're married, because they would have been. It was a public relation nightmare. Yeah, they would have been blackballed in Hollywood if you go back far enough. So you can see how much just say 75 years in in 75 years how much we've changed, how much the culture has changed.
And so what we want to focus on tonight, and I'm going to give you a couple more questions here, but what we want to focus on is the infidelity aspect, okay? The cheating on the spouse, okay? Now, I actually found this interesting because I was doing a little research for this. The divorce rate in this country has actually come down a little bit recently, within the last 5 years or so, okay? But the marriage rate has as well. I don't know if you can see that graph up there, but the blue line up top represents the marriage rate. The peak right there in the middle, if you can see that, that was right after World War II. Okay? Marriage rate skyrocketed, but if you look at the red line, guess what else skyrocketed? The divorce rate did as well. So there's kind of a trend there. Marriage rate dropped in the late 70s, early 80s. So did the divorce rate. It climbed back up in the 90s and 2000s. Now both are on a general decline. Okay? But it's still, the divorce rate remains between 40 and 50% in this country. So almost half of all marriages end in divorce. So do you think it's harder for couples to stay married now than maybe a couple of generations ago? Why not? I hear several no's. Why not? Okay, people are still people.
I wouldn't say it's harder. I think that a couple of generations ago, it would have been frowned upon far more. And so even if it happened, it would have been more of a secret. It wouldn't have been bandied about. I think now we just don't care.
Don't care,
No,
yeah.
and therefore we just hear about it. I don't think the rate has changed really at all.
Well, obviously, as far as the marriage rate combined with the divorce rate, you can see the correlation on the graph there, and they're both coming down. So if you don't have as many marriages, obviously you're not going to have as many divorces.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I wonder, kind of going with that, if a couple of generations ago, people wanted to divorce, but they stayed together because of the social stigma or because of the kids, or what, and like you said, now nobody cares.
I do think that happens some. You do see in that divorce rate that is coming down some. A lot of those are couples that have their kids get grown, and now we've got our kids out of the house, we can get divorced.
Yep.
And that, I mean, that's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of my friends, that was like a thing. Like, they literally graduated within a year.
Yep.
Their parents were divorced.
Yeah.
Yep. So they were.
That's what they said, we have literally been hanging on
Because of the
we need
kids.
to get them through.
Yep. All right, one more question before we move into our scriptures. Do you think there is more adultery than in previous generations, or do you think it's just fewer people are willing to stay together? There's again another typo. You didn't catch my typos today, Mark. Fewer people are willing to stay together when they have problems. Which one do you think it might be?
I think we just know more about adultery now because we're so connected socially and news, and there's nothing that's kept off the table anymore, whereas back in the day you didn't have all of that.
Okay. Interesting point. I tend to agree with you, not just with that, but with a lot of other things too. I don't want to get off on that tangent, but we're way more connected now than we've ever been, and we're more aware of things going on worldwide even. So maybe that's a big part of it.
What would have made a difference, and I'm just going to go back pre-World War II, what would have made a difference if adultery took place, if the husband was unfaithful to the wife, but the wife didn't leave her husband? Why would that have been pre-World War II? He didn't have a job, no skill, yeah. So a
Couldn't
lot of
support
women
themselves.
were just basically, they had no choice.
They were trapped.
Yeah.
But they weren't connected. I mean, like, we're so over-connected. Back in the day, that woman would have been minding her house mostly.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have had a lot of time for the other things, and so she wouldn't have friends to vent to online.
Exactly.
To feed the notions.
Yeah.
I do think that makes a huge difference. I think now, it's not that people are less willing to stay together, but I think we talk too much. It's really the truth of it. And a lot of times we're not talking to people who are putting that mindset. If infidelity happens, right, there are marriages that survive it.
Mhm.
But they survive it because they go and get the right kind of help. If you get the wrong kind of help, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's just the truth.
Yep.
Go to somebody who is trained to handle it, you can survive. If you don't, if you go to your friends, you're not gonna make it. Because they're gonna tell you it's not worth it.
Well, we're basically talking about worldly wisdom versus God wisdom, which is what Proverbs is all about. So,
And that's a great segue into now the scriptures we're going to be talking about, because if you read ahead, you know that in these passages we're going to be looking at tonight, Solomon is going to be giving his son and sons, not just one son, but his sons, some advice about adultery and temptation, to be unfaithful to your spouse. So we're going to look at that and see what that godly wisdom is compared to the worldly wisdom that we hear nowadays. Okay, maybe that's adultery has always been destructive, and maybe that's why Solomon spent so much time warning his son about the dangers of playing with fire. And you're actually going to see perhaps the source of that phrase, playing with fire, in these passages tonight. That was what the title was, playing with fire. So let's start with Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. Mark.
my son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it.
All right. First of all, before we move on, in verse 3, does anybody have a different word for the ESV that we use here uses forbidden woman? Anybody have a different word there? Immoral, adulteress. Anybody using the King James? Strange woman. Okay. The literal translation of that would be a forbidden woman. That's why I like the ESV here. It's a woman that a married man is not allowed to have. Who's the only woman a married man's allowed to have? His wife. Right? And so that's why I like the translation there. Because strange, can mean a lot of different things. We got some strange women in this world. I wasn't saying in here, okay? In this world, all right? So, but just again, because we'll come back to that phrase again in verse 20. So again, just think, a forbidden woman.
And in the Hebrew, a lot of times that word is translated prostitute. Mm-hmm. So it can allude to prostitute as well.
So what does Solomon say here in these 6 verses, especially beginning in verse 3? Well, number 1, in verses 1 and 2, what's the repeated advice that we've already seen so far in Proverbs? He's telling his son, listen to me. And again, if Solomon, and we don't know at what point in his life he was when he wrote this, but I think it's safe to assume he's getting on up in years. He's already made a lot of the mistakes that we know that he made, and he's coming back around, to the right paths here because of what he writes, in the books that he wrote. So he knew. How many women did Solomon have at his disposal? Anybody remember? It was 1,000. 700 wives. I'm not going to make the joke. 300 concubines. Okay? Not porcupines, concubines. Right? Anyway, 1,000 women at his disposal. So I'm sure he's speaking from experience here. Okay? I'm sure some of those women he married, or some of those concubines he took into his harem, basically, because maybe they were, as he describes right here. So he's telling his son, listen to my wisdom. I know what I'm talking about. Okay? But then in verses 3 through 6, how does he describe these forbidden women? Okay, they're tempting, but they'll take you straight to hell. Well, what's some of the imagery he uses in verses 3 and 4? Okay, the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. What else? Her speech is smoother than oil. Okay? They are sweet talkers. We're going to get to another phrase, and if you read ahead, you know what it is, but it's really, that's a little tease there, okay? They're smooth, they're sweet talkers, but verse 4 he says what? In the end, she is bitter as wormwood. What else? Sharp as a two-edged or double-edged sword. What does he say in verse 5? Her feet go down to death. Okay, her steps follow to the path of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Okay? All these things. Now, I want to say right here, okay, at the beginning, number one, we are not picking on women tonight, okay? Shane, we're not picking on women, okay? Because he got up to leave, y'all. The same advice would apply to if Solomon had a daughter, I'm sure he'd give her the same advice about a man, okay? Men can be tempting and cause women to be unfaithful to their spouses, okay? So we're not picking on women, okay? I want you to understand that. This applies to both genders. The only two genders there are, right? Okay? But because Solomon is speaking to his sons, he's using the woman, so that's what we're going to use tonight, okay? But realize this applies across the board, all right? What do you see here as being, again, based on his description, as the first step to adultery? Okay. Okay. What else? Look at how he describes the woman in verse 3. We looked at it, but what are the two things that he says there? Well, okay, look specifically at verse 3. What are the two things he mentions? The lips drip forbidden honey. What's the implication there? What she's saying. And then what's next? Her speech. Okay? Her speech. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3 with the very first temptation that is recorded. And how did Satan tempt Eve? With his words. He lied to her, didn't he? He said, did God really say this? God doesn't, God, that's not what he means. And I'm paraphrasing here, he doesn't want you to be as wise as he is. You need, it was his speech. It was his lies. And then you keep reading there in Genesis 3, when she listened to his words and saw that fruit was good for food, then she took and ate. Okay? But it was the words first. We see the same thing right here. Solomon's saying, you got to pay attention to what they're saying, because it's just a bunch of lies. Okay? Now, I don't want to get into all the details that could be there, all right? But I would say that dishonesty is the first step to adultery. Okay? So what would you guess is the most common lie told by a person who's about to be unfaithful to their marriage partner?
A lot of people say that they're leaving the spouse, it justifies that.
Okay. So the married person might say to the one they're about to commit adultery with, I'm leaving my spouse anyway, so it's okay. All right, that's one. What else might they say? Or what other lies might be told with either party?
They're just friends.
We're just friends, When one spouse begins to suspect the other spouse of having an inappropriate relationship, we're just friends. There's nothing to it. What else would go along with that? You're overreacting, But in the back of their minds, they know that there's more to it. Right? Or maybe they're lying to themselves. Mm-hmm. Maybe they think we're just friends, or you're overreacting when the spouse is seeing really what's going on. Right? But dishonesty is, I believe, that first step to adultery. The invitations to infidelity, according to Solomon, are sweet as honey, smooth as oil. But they got a way of turning sour. That's what that wormwood means. Right? Go ahead, David.
Maybe before being dishonest, probably a lot of dishonesty with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to bring this to 2025, and I'll approach this from a man's position, is the only one I got. But as a person who goes to the gym, not enough, but when it goes, I will try to make some observations. 20 years ago, I was going to the gym. Men relatively dress the same as they do now as they did 20 years ago. But I've noticed recently, or go back a few years, spandex took over at the gym for women. But even more recently, the Observation. I will call it the Brazilian booty lift. And I'm being very honest. I gotta be honest. But there's machines in there that work out the rear end. You never see a man on those machines. They're all doing the bench press. So, and it's the women seek these out. Because I'm from Riviera, and I'm kind of not even being a pervert, but you see, I mean, you're there because you're trying to wait to get to your machine. And I said, well, what does it do to have big arms and chest? Well, for a man, you're more muscular, you can lift and do things. And I'm trying to think, what is it that for women now, the focus is to have the big rear end? Does it help you do your thing better? It does nothing better, more, in my opinion, than attract men. And I ain't trying to be ugly, but I'm being honest. Now, Peter may let me go one little further since I already done my whole.
That's not a hole, that's a grave, David.
But you go back to what I think the essence of what Solomon is trying to say is, son, pay attention. When you look over at that, know that there's a hook in it. And that's for men and women. And if that is what you seek, if that is what you are seeking, that's what you're going to find.
Yeah.
And it's, you just, and so many people just, they get enthralled by that. And whether, and I've said this before, but it's something I try to live by, and I didn't come up with it. But men often try to judge a woman by how big her rear end is and how big her breast is. But a godly man will judge a woman by how big her heart is. And that takes being a man, maybe even half a lifetime to learn, if ever. And that goes both ways. And now I'm
So without me digging a hole here, let me say something here, okay? Generally speaking, you're right, okay? It's been shown through all kinds of studies, men are more visually attracted when it comes to the opposite sex. On the flip side of that, women are emotionally attracted. And if they start falling in love with a guy who shows them attention and they feel like is investing in them, that's their big temptation. So both genders have stuff they have to watch out for, okay? And again, that's what Solomon's getting at here. And again, in fact, this is a good segue to the next verse. Go ahead, Kathy Jo.
I was just going to say that could be why Satan approached Eve with the talk
Mm-hmm.
to convince her, because Adam probably wouldn't have fallen for her, because he knew better. These, guys, they think different.
Mm-hmm.
But, she's maybe hearing what she wants to hear,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just leading her right down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good point. All right, so let's listen to what Solomon says here in verses 7 through 14. And now, O son, so he's just said what he said about, the forbidden woman and everything. Now, O sons, listen to me. And do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, referring back to that forbidden woman, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. And at the end of your life you groan when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. So in these verses, what's the point Solomon's trying to get across to his sons? Okay, well, yeah, to a certain extent, probably do as I say, or at least not as I have done. Okay, what else?
I don't know if it's, when you were reading all that, it reminded me of Samson.
Okay,
Pretty much. He didn't listen to his parents. He followed his head.
He followed his flesh.
yeah,
He wound up in all kinds of, it says, give your honor to others, let strangers take your fill their strength. I mean, he was used and abused because he was.
so basically what Solomon is saying here, if you give in to that temptation, then what? Especially these verses that are on the screen right there. Yeah, it's going to ruin your life. It will ruin your life if you are unfaithful to your spouse. That's the point that he's trying to make. The negative consequences of adultery. Solomon is basically saying here, if people knew the path where temptation would eventually lead, they would think twice before giving in. And that applies to any temptation to sin, okay? But we're especially talking here about, the sin to commit adultery. Go ahead.
I don't even think it's just adultery. When you look at it again, I think it's just a man being enticed by an immoral woman.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a man, that can be their immediate preference.
Yep. Yep.
It brings to mind the prophets talking about Israel and how they were basically committing adultery against God.
Yep.
And that is what this reminds me of. Because he says you're in brink of ruin in the assembled congregation. And essentially he's saying, if you do this, whether it be physically or spiritually, when this happens, and for him, it was the physical led to spiritual perfection.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because he married all these
Foreign women, yep.
They brought idols into his country. They
Mhm.
brought idols into his house.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you see that, and they get very reminiscent of what Israel was told over and over again. That sin of adultery, yes, it applies in our physical relationships. However, it also applies in our spiritual life with
Right.
God. And when we commit it against God, we are done. There is no, you can come back, but it takes
Mhm.
a mighty heat, right?
Yep.
It takes you surrendering fully to Him. And
Yeah.
He says that over and over again to Israel throughout the prophet.
And I think that's done on purpose. That's why he uses that analogy over and over through the prophets. That Israel is committing spiritual adultery. They had made a covenant with him. They were in a spiritual relationship, and they were going off and being unfaithful in other spiritual ways. They were worshiping other gods. They were doing all these other things and committing spiritual adultery. I think that's exactly why he did that.
God, ultimately, God said he was going to divorce or put away Israel because of their unfaithfulness, spiritual unfaithfulness.
And again, I know the answer to this question that I've got on screen, we could spend all night on it, but just a few seconds here. What are some potential long-term problems caused by infidelity that a young person might not think of in the heat of the moment? Okay, STDs. What's that? Having a baby, okay, out of wedlock. The emotional damage to children, to their spouse, to themselves, to their other family members. What else? What, in essence, is adultery? I kind of mentioned it a second ago. Dishonesty, but
It's what?
oh, you can get shot. But in its essence, what is adultery? Well, it's instant gratification, yes.
Says all sins that a man commits, he does outside his body, but if you sin sexually, you commit it against your own body.
Okay.
So obviously, it would be something that you're doing directly to yourself.
Okay, that's true. Think back to Israel and God in their relationship. When God said they were committing adultery, what were they doing? Yes, but what do we call that? They were being unfaithful. Adultery is the act of unfaithfulness to your spouse, someone that you have made a commitment to.
That's what the Hebrew word literally means, breaking covenant vows. That's what Jesus is talking about in the New Testament.
So when you're dishonest, when you break a covenant vow you made with someone, what's a potential downside to that? Or what is a downside? Not potential. It's going to happen. Do what? Death. Okay, death. Separation, okay. That's one big one. What else? Think about when your kids are not honest with you. Okay. It will never be the same. One of the best illustrations I heard of it is like this. You take a plate, ceramic plate, china plate, whatever, okay? When you first make that commitment, that vow, you make that covenant with God or with your spouse, any kind of covenant or vow you make, it's like that plate. When you break that covenant, it's like you take that plate and you break it. Now, can you glue it back together? Yeah, sometimes. You can put the pieces back together. Will it ever be the same? No. Now, it may last. You can still use it, and it may work for you for years to come, but it will never be the same because that trust has been broken. And again, as has been brought up, think of that spiritually as well. Now, Aren't you glad we serve a loving and forgiving God who can forget the things that we do to him? Because as humans, we can't forget the things that we do to each other. And it's hard, and we've said, some marriages can survive infidelity, but they're never the same. It takes a long time for that trust to come back, if ever. And I just about guarantee you it'll never be at the level that it was originally. So that's something that people don't think of in the moment. All right, we need to move on here. We've got several more points we want to cover. So now let's go to Proverbs 5:15 through 23. I think it's your turn, Mark.
Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for the strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman or a strange woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray.
So Solomon is basically telling his son here, the grass isn't greener on the other side of the fence. Where is the grass greenest? Where you water it.
Over the
septic tank.
Septic tank.
Y'all are gross. The grass is greener where you water. That's what Solomon's saying right here. And I love some of the phrases in here. In fact, I'm going to share something with you, and I can say this because Kathy's not in here tonight, okay? No, this is good, okay? But she'd be embarrassed by it. I have a picture. We went to the beach years ago before we had kids, and we had some pictures made on the beach, and there's one of us kissing, okay? And I took that picture, and I took a couple of these phrases. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. Be intoxicated in her love. I love that phrase. Be intoxicated in the love of your spouse. That's how we're to be with one another, not chasing off after everybody else. So anyway, y'all don't tell her I said that, okay, because she'll be embarrassed. I know some of y'all are going to go run tell her right afterwards, okay? So what practical suggestions would you give a young newlywed couple about avoiding divorce and to keep their marriage relationship strong? And again, we could spend the rest of our time on this. Okay, communication is probably one of the biggest ones. Make God the center. God's got to come first. Okay? If you're going to have a relationship and you're both Christians, God has to be first. He's got to be the foundation of everything. Okay? That's got to be number one. And then I would say communication is probably the second one. And?
You have to make sure that your friends are not all divorced. You need to have friends that model the things you want. Because if you hang out with a bunch of divorced people, partying and stuff, you can end up, I've never seen it end up in something.
Okay. So being careful with the company you keep. If you hang around with a lot of divorced people or a lot of people that are cheating on their spouses and staying together with one another, or just single, yeah.
Or worldly people.
Worldly people, for that matter, yeah. What else? What other advice?
Whether that be a therapist or, people that have been married a long time.
Okay. Knowing who to go to. And I would say even use caution there because so many worldly therapists and counselors will tell you, just get divorced. That's the best thing for you, just get divorced. So you got to be careful even within of whose counsel you seek. Okay? What else? Anything? Honesty is the best policy. Not just communicate with each other, but be honest with each other. Okay?
I have to consider that when you go into this thing, it's forever, not just for one night. It's a forever thing, and you need to communicate as one person and talk to each other constantly about what's going on in your lives.
And that's a great point, Barbara, because I think so much of the mindset in the world today is we're going to get married until we don't want to be married anymore. They go into it with that mindset, and it's no wonder marriages don't work. because they're not going into it with the mindset, I'm going to work through problems. I'm going to love my spouse. You know, I mean, we say those vows. I think some people don't pay attention to their vows anymore, you know. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, sickness and in health, you know. Good times and bad. So many people nowadays just, oh, I'll be with you in the good times, you know. And men are especially guilty of this, okay. Men, I'm fuss at us, okay. Until the new model comes out, right? Till you find one that's 10 years younger or 20 years younger, and, you know, the one you married 20 years ago starts to get some wrinkles and some gray hair, and then, oh, no, see you later. I want the new model. I saw a hand back here. Roy, I think it was you.
Stuff that we talk about, but a lot of marriages fail because one of the individuals in that marriage wants what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not serious, where they hurt their wife, their husband, their kids, their mother, their daddy, their God. That's what I want right now. And I think, because you know and I know that marriage has got to be a commitment. You just got to say it.
Yep.
If you get married with the idea, when I was going to college, back many years ago, you get to say, man, I'm gonna get married, but it's not forever. I don't care. You know, so if you go into a marriage with that on your mind, then your chances are it's gonna fail. But if you're not committed, both committed to that marriage, because a woman can divorce a man, and a man can divorce a woman, and I mean,
Yep.
for nothing.
Yep.
I just, you gain too much weight, you know, whatever the case may be. So, one of those parties could be very innocent and couldn't have stopped in no way, shape, or form. So, that to me is, I guess you call it self-centered people that wants what I want. I want to be happy, and this is what's going to make me happy.
And that's an excellent point, Roy, is that so many people go into it with a selfish attitude. What's going to be in this relationship for me? Okay? And you may have heard this before. I mean, you know, marriage is a 50-50 proposal. No. Marriage is a 100-100 proposal. Everybody's got to give 100% to that marriage. Okay? And I think Barbara said, you got to go into it with the mindset that, you know, I'm going to put the work into it. I'm going to put the effort into it. Marriage is work, y'all. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Y'all know this, okay? It's work. It's relationships of any kind take work. They don't just happen, and when we fall out of love or when things start to go south, then we leave and find that, you know, that's not how it works. Go ahead.
I would say, I would never underestimate the power of Satan and his smoothness. And even now, it's so subtle, it's shocking. Because it's really, all of this is taking place in the mind months or years before any action is happening. For example, just with the internet, it is so amazing the things that you look at that people keep. If you click on or look at duck hunting, you're going to be saturated with every duck hunting all over. But if you, and they fish on it, and they'll send you a few pictures of a girl with a bikini, and then you hit on those. Well, then it'll start sending you some with a little bit more, and a little bit more, and that's Satan pulling you in so subtle. And then, and say you get, you know, into that, at least pornography, you're in that for a year or so. It's in there cultivating in your mind, it's brewing. And then after a year, 2 years, Satan was very patient. And then all of a sudden at work, there's that person, that like you were talking about, that's a decade younger, and they're paying attention to you. And let's just say Satan has worked it around that fight you rarely had. And now you start this conversation. And then that takes 6 months. Again, he's very patient. And then that's how you want, it's not always like King David walking along the groove and you see the lady boom. It's not always, it happened to him, but I don't live in a castle or on my knees. But Satan, don't underestimate how long he is willing to cultivate your mind. And that's why it's so important to keep your mind focused and know, kind of like that song, you need to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to Because once you start going down, you don't know what's going to end.
Yep. And going along to kind of one of the things you said there, and studies have shown this. Mark knows this. He's done marital and premarital counseling. I've done it as well. People don't usually become physically involved with another individual until after they become emotionally involved with them. And again, yes, men are still visually attracted first and then women, okay, but so to protect themselves from temptation, married people should continue to invest in their relationship with their partner. Don't invest in a relationship with someone that is not your spouse, especially of the opposite gender, because that can lead to too many temptations. That's not to say that you can't have friends of the opposite gender, okay? But know that the temptation is there, and your spouse has got to come first. If you're talking more to your coworker about your problems than you are to your spouse, something's wrong, okay? Something's wrong. Go ahead, Chris.
I would say too, I hear, and I think I've even heard somebody say that, oh, you know, you should date each other or spend, but you also have to be realistic, like we talked about, it's about honestly whether you listen to it or not, and we model it. Marriage is not dating and happiness, a lot more, there's a lot more stress,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're raising children. You have to talk to them too that, you know, the feeling you have when you first meet and get married, that's not love. That really is not love. You are not even mature enough yet to understand. You think you know what's love, it's not. You spend 10, 15, 20 years together, you go through some really hard times, and then you realize, oh, this is love, surviving that, getting back up, and choosing to do that. Even on the day you don't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's love, but it's an eros. It's a different kind of love than agape love.
Yep. That agape love is what comes with time. It's that choosing love.
Yeah.
All right, we've got just a few minutes left. Let's see if we can get done with this. So going now to Proverbs chapter 6, and we're going to start in verse 20. And I'm just going to read the first part of verse 20 and then skip down to 23 because I knew we were going to run out of time. So Proverbs 6, beginning in verse 20. My son, keep your father's commandment. Now verse 23. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Now notice this in verse 25. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. I thought that was hilarious, y'all. You see in the cartoons and in the movies, you know, the woman blinking. That comes from Solomon, y'all, okay? For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. Now here's where the topic comes in, okay? Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. What's Solomon basically saying there with that phrase? Okay, well, yeah, unless you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But they weren't going into other women, okay? They were just going into a fiery furnace, all right? What's he basically saying here? You play with fire, you're going to get burned. If you play with fire, you are going to get burned. So since adultery is so destructive, why do you think people keep playing with fire? Okay, Satan is good. David already talked about, you know, he's patient. He waits, you know, okay, what else? It feels good. It's exciting, you know. You're getting attention from somebody new, and maybe and again, this is one thing that I've learned in doing marriage counseling and things. When needs are not met in a relationship, especially in a marriage relationship, they're going to be met somewhere else. Period. End of story. You know, if you're not getting the emotional fulfillment you need from your spouse, you're going to go seek it out somewhere else. If you're not getting whatever the need is, you fill in the blank. If you're not getting that in the marriage relationship, and I'm talking about ones that are designed to be fulfilled in the marriage relationship, you're more than likely going to go find it somewhere else.
Or even if you don't go seeking it, when that need begins to be fulfilled, it can be in the break room at work, and it begins to be fulfilled by someone who will sit and listen to you when your wife won't. Then that's when that emotional attraction begins.
And again, that's one thing that I have learned in studying. men, and this is statistically shown, men typically have affairs with women who are less attractive than their wife. So it's not a physical thing. It's those other needs being fulfilled, just like Mark was saying. You know, they're being met in other ways, and then they fall in love with that person. You know, and then they fall in bed with that person. Go ahead, Grace. Absolutely, gives place to the devil. All right. So, do you think Solomon means that people play with fire? Okay. Do you think he means they won't give in to temptation, or they think they won't get caught? Okay, for a lot of people, they think, I'm not going to get caught. I could do this and get away with it. Chris?
I think a lot of people starting out like this too are just like drug addicts. It's not even getting caught. They don't ever think they're going to fall.
I'm not going to get hooked.
And
Mhm.
they think, well, that would never be me.
Yep. And then it becomes them. Ed? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. There's going to be consequences. Absolutely. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I literally sit in the break room having coffee and someone sits down and chats with me and it's slow.
Mm-hmm.
It's this thing that happens over
Time.
such a long period
Yep.
of time that at some point I don't even know where it happened.
Yep. Absolutely.
And Solomon is saying you have to stop, you have to recognize it here and not wait till I'm
Yeah.
here.
It's
Exactly.
like
You have to be aware of that
Yep.
far sooner than you
Yeah.
think.
It's like the frog in the water.
Yeah.
Put it on slow boil. And,
Yep.
and yeah, you're still going to get burned eventually.
Yep. All right, we got one more passage I think we might can get through it. I think it's your turn to read.
People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry, but if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all the goods of his house. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. He will get wounds and dishonor, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation. He will refuse though you multiply gifts.
All right, so as we get ready to close here, okay, well, and I should have said this at the beginning, I'm going to say it here. All sin is wrong, okay, period. Everybody hear me say that? Okay, all sin is wrong. But some sins have greater, and I'm going to add this word, physical consequences than other sins, okay? Would y'all agree with that? Some sins have greater now, spiritually speaking, any sin separates us from God, okay? So that consequence, I'm talking about here on this earth, okay? Some sins have greater consequences than others. So in what ways could the after effects of adultery be more serious than the fallout from other kinds of immorality? We kind of touched on this earlier, but what are some ways that adultery and infidelity can be more serious than other kinds of immorality? Okay, money. You're going to pay for it for sure, okay? In probably more than one way.
I think it lasts so much longer. Like the consequences aren't just immediate; they tend to trail out over years.
Even for people whose marriages have survived infidelity, they've stayed together and tried to work on their marriage, those thoughts can still come back. Those hurts can still resurface, years down the road. So, years down the road, things can still come back. What else? Kathy Jo? Pregnancy, right?
And at that point, you got the decision, are you gonna, have an abortion?
Mm-hmm.
I like how they lose respect of other people around them.
Yeah.
They lose their honor, their respect, and their love of their family.
Well, and that's exactly what Solomon says there. He'll get wounds and dishonor. His disgrace will not be wiped away.
I think referring to people with biblical morals or
Mhm.
morality. Yeah.
David?
To get involved in other sins such as David's led to murder.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, people in their workplace, and especially if you're in a managerial position, it lends itself to
Mm-hmm.
So now it's not affecting your home life, it's also in your job, so it kind of lends itself to other things to cover that up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. All right, summary statement. Solomon teaches us that it takes uncommon sense wisdom to recognize that anyone can get burned. If you play with fire, you're going to get burned. And that the way to prevent the destructive consequences of adultery is to avoid temptations and to strengthen your own marriage. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it's never going to happen, okay? But these are ways to try to avoid it. Avoid the temptations, strengthen your own marriage. All right, next week, to achieve financial freedom, avoid debt. Duh. We're going to be looking at Proverbs 6. We're going to go backwards a little bit. Proverbs 6, verses 1 through 5. Chapter 11, 15. Chapter 22, 7. Verses 26 to 27. Chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. Those of you, see some of you taking pictures of that with your phone. If you want to read ahead, snap a photo of that before Rick takes it down, okay? Any final thoughts, comments, questions? All right, appreciate your attention. Thank you for being here.
That'll be a fun one.